if you have found a gorgeous project in a knitting magazine or on an Instagram page and you've gone into the details, you know, figured out the yarn and been shocked by how much it would actually cost you to knit a project, this video is really for you. Welcome to the Crimson Stitchery. My name is Anushka. You can find me elsewhere online as Sourtelling, and links for this video can be found in the down bar here on YouTube. Knitting and crochet can be a very expensive hobby. It's definitely no longer cheaper to make your own clothes than it is to buy ready-to-wear stuff from the high street, and that is because of mass production. That's the way of the world. But though it's not necessarily a cheaper thing to do, there are so many benefits associated with these wonderful, wonderful hobbies. And quite frankly, knitting and crochet doesn't have to be as expensive as it can seem. I started to knit when I was a teenager, when I was 14, and although I've always worked from the age of 16 onwards, I have always knitted on a budget. Although I've had periods in my life when I've had, you know, decent salaries. At the moment, I'm a postgraduate student and I've been one for quite a number of years. So knitting on a budget is something that is very, very familiar to me since I've been knitting for over half of my life. And it is actually something that I find really, really creative, satisfying. It's a wonderful way of enjoying a hobby in an accessible manner. And furthermore, it pushes your creativity in ways that you might not have expected. So this year, since January, I've been running the Stashless 2020 initiative, which is about cultivating a different relationship to the way that I purchase, use and keep materials in my home. And although I've been running this initiative for my own personal reasons to do with space and budget constraints, I have had several people comment saying things along the lines of, I wish I had that problem, or if you've got too much yarn, send it to me because I don't have any and I can't afford to buy any yarn at all. And so whilst this week I was planning on releasing a video about my year of stashing less so far, I thought I would actually address those concerns. Because for me, as I said, my Stashless 2020 year is about developing my thinking and reflecting on consumerism and craft. There are many, many reasons in which you might actually manage to accumulate quite a large stash of materials at a very, very low cost, which has got nothing actually to do with shopping and consumerism. Nonetheless, I thought it was worth sharing the many, many tips and tricks that I have gleaned over the years of knitting on a budget. I've been knitting, as I said, since I was 14, so 15 years or so. Knitting and crochet on a budget really is an act of creativity within itself, and so I hope that through this video you find some new ideas about how to continue exploring these crafts and hopefully experience that although there might be some financial limitations or otherwise, this actually doesn't have to place any boundaries on your creative potential. So without further ado, let's get started. Tip number one is to become monogamous. Plan your projects really, really well. And make sure that you swatch, make sure that you research the right materials, choose the right sizes, take accurate measurements and all of the rest of it. Start your project, work on your project, get to the end of your project, do the finishing, seaming, weave in the ends, and enjoy your project. So obviously the idea of what's called monogamous knitting or crochet, I'm kind of using knitting as a catch-all term, so crocheters, please don't feel offended, it just reflects my own practice. But yeah, it can be a little bit, divisive, it can even be controversial, and personally I don't set a hard and fast rule about it, but I do find that when I just stick to one or two projects at a time and I get them done, I have so much more motivation to keep going, to keep finishing things and just to enjoy my crafts. In quite an obvious way, if you've got a big pile of unfinished projects sitting in the corner of your house, that is, quite frankly, a big pile of wasted money. So don't let that happen, keep going and don't give up. Number two, hone your eye. This is a really important thing that you will be continuing to develop throughout your crafting career. Hone your eye, work out exactly what is going to work for you. So whether you're doing homewares or toys or, I don't know, other kind of creative artistic projects, or you're making garments for yourself to wear or to give away, you need to be figuring out exactly what is going to work for that situation. So you need to work out what type of fit and shape is going to work, what type of textures suit you or suit the purposes, or even what kind of fabric characteristics you enjoy creating. Do you like doing lace or do you hate it? Do you like cables or hate it, for example, with knitting? Don't waste time and money on acquiring all of the materials for a project which you will never end up wearing or never end up using. And this is something that, you know, you have to figure out along the way. You will make mistakes, but make sure that you learn from those mistakes. And also become very, very aware and analytical when it comes to pattern photography, styling and modeling. There are so many times when you see an absolutely stunning photograph and you want to make it, you know, you can't wait to cast it on, especially if it seems like everybody else on the whole internet is doing that as well. But you really need to step back, take the time to analyze it and work out what are the actual, you know, details and the specific characteristics of the project. Is it going to suit you? Is it going to fit you? Are you actually going to wear it? There are so many times when I've seen things that are gorgeous, and then when, you know, when I really examine it, I'm thinking, oh, actually it's really shapeless, or actually it's the wrong length, you know, I would never knit cables in that way, or, you know, whatever it is. But I think it's possible to, you know, just enjoy the photography for what it is as another, you know, source of aesthetic pleasure without necessarily having to find yourself diving in there and, you know, spending time and money making something that actually is never really going to be well integrated into your life. On that note, number 3, get comfortable with frogging. If you are working on a project and you're, you know, not quite sure if it's going to work out, just accept that. Because the wonderful thing about knitting and crochet and making things with yarn is that you can always unravel it and start again, make something new. And I think that sometimes that does involve a little bit of humility, you know, putting your pride aside and, you know, admitting when things have gone wrong, when you've made the wrong decision, or when you haven't been successful in your execution due to your skill or your application of certain techniques. But that's okay. It's all part of the learning process. And again, at the end of the day, it's so much better to have something that is going to be integrated into your daily life that you can love and enjoy wearing and using and having around you than it is to have something sitting around reminding you of failure. So as a good example, this is a shawl that I made. So I actually made this from some really beautiful and quite expensive hand-dyed yarn that I treated myself to a number of years ago. And I made a pair of knee-high socks and I wore them a few times, but the hand-dyed yarn was 100% merino and it was totally unsuitable for socks, and also the knee-high socks just kept sagging and falling down. It just wasn't working, and I had treated myself to this yarn, you know, I had saved up for it because it was very, very expensive. And a number of years later, when I had had changed jobs, I was in the middle of my master's degree. In fact, I was in a study abroad program, so I was literally living off my savings. And I thought to myself, do you know what? Rather than having this expensive pair of socks lying around, not being worn, I'm going to take the opportunity to unravel the socks and re-knit a lovely shawl out of beautiful yarn that I have worn an awful lot. And that was a great thing to do, you know, in that period of time as well. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with this shawl. It's been so much better, and along the way I've learned many things about knitting socks. And whilst it, you know, did feel a little bit heartbreaking because I'd spent so long making the socks, at the end of the day it's so much better just to be able to wear the shawl. As well as harvesting yarn from your own old projects or failed projects, you can also consider harvesting yarn from second-hand projects, you know, whether they are from a charity shop or a thrift shop. If you learn how to frog or unravel old sweaters and things like that from there, and that is quite an acquired skill, I've got to say. Or if you're chatting to other knitters and family members and find kind of old projects or things that other people have abandoned, great, unravel it, use it, knit it, work it. Tip number 4 concerns patterns. When it comes to patterns, a lot of the time books can be better value, especially if you have made the, you know, very firm decision to only buy a pattern book if there are many patterns in it that you're going to knit. So as an example, I've got this book here to talk about, A Stitch in Time. This is unsponsored. I'm talking about this off my own free will because I think that this is a great example of something being really great value. So this book retails from the Susan Crawford Vintage website at £35 plus postage and packing. Now, I looked up my old purchase order and I was charged £5.50 for postage. And also I bought the book when it happened to be on sale. But if we just take the recommended retail price of £35, and if we round up the postage to £10 for postage to think about international shipping and taxes and things like that, we can assume that this book costs about £45. Now, that is an awful lot of money to just drop on a book, obviously, but there are 80 patterns, and if you crunch the numbers, £45 divided by 80 makes every pattern 56 pence. Now, obviously, it's pretty unlikely that you are going to like every single one of those 80 patterns. Even as I'm saying it, 80 is so many. And even if you do like many of them, it does, it's quite unlikely that you might actually get round to knitting all of those 80 patterns at 56p. A maximum of 56p per pattern. But I went through this book. Now, I bought this book in August last year when Susan happened to be having a sale, and I've already knit 2 projects from it, and I have yarn for a 3rd project waiting. And just now I went through and I did actually manage to bookmark 5 more projects. So even if I only knit 8 out of the 80 patterns, that still works out to £5.60 per pattern. When you go onto Susan's website and if you want to buy individual patterns, they are £6 each. So I am saving a little bit on the cost there. And again, that was sort of trying to guess at a maximum possible cost, but actually I paid quite a bit less for that. Again, I've got to say that I am quite strict, and when it comes to books and magazines, I will only buy them if I know that I'm going to knit between a third and half of the patterns in the book. Obviously with this book with 80, that was a bit much, but in a smaller book you might expect to get something between 8 and 20 patterns, so I'd hope to get around a third of the patterns, at least that I like or I would consider doing. But when it comes to the book, sometimes you only like one thing from the book, in which case if you can't afford the book, if the book is £20 or £25, that's quite a lot of money to pay for just one pattern, and in those instances I would actually wait to see if the pattern is going to be released as an individual PDF, or I might do some research and web searching and see if I can buy another pattern that's similar and make modifications and things like that. So when you have to knit on a budget, you often have to do a lot of research and a lot of sleuthing, and ultimately that is adding to your skill set when it comes to patterns, when it comes to making choices, alterations, learning about yarn and so on and so forth, as I will continue to discuss. So books are worth it a lot of the time, but sometimes it might be worth it just to get the individual pattern and not, spend the rest of that money in that case. And when it comes to individual PDF patterns, especially when it comes to books and magazines, just be aware that a lot of the time the publishers do have an exclusivity period with the designer, but it might be worth looking at a designer's portfolio and trying to gauge if they do tend to release individual patterns after the fact, or even just contacting them and asking them, because at the end of the day they probably will be quite happy to hear that there is interest, there's more interest out there for making individual sales. We all need to earn a living at the end of the day. Tip number 6 is to invest in good quality tools when you can afford them. Especially when you are starting off with a new hobby, it can feel really, really overwhelming with the amount of tools and materials that it seems like you have to buy. But just beware that when it comes to cheaper tools, sometimes there can be a false economy, which is basically when you think you're buying something cheap, but it's actually of a lower quality and it ends up becoming damaged or even breaking and becoming useless very, very quickly. In another sense, sometimes when you buy cheaper tools that aren't that well designed, it can cause physical problems, if they're not ergonomic, basically, if they don't work with your body type, with your stance, with the way that you tension and hold the tools and the yarn. So that's just something to really be aware of, and this is something that I have continually stressed throughout all of my videos on my channel, because at the end of the day, if you end up doing damage to your body and you have to pay for physiotherapy or recovery or whatever else it happens to be, that's going to end up costing way more money in the long term. So when you can afford it, go in there and buy the best quality and the most ergonomical and the most safe and suitable tools that you can. 7. 7, staying on the topic of tools, choose tools that can have a multiple range of purposes. And a great example of this is with knitting needles. A couple of years ago, I invested in my first set of interchangeable needles. I purchased a set of higher sharps, and I have been really delighted with these. Now, again, I just had to swallow the cost and accept that and splurge out on them. I think I did it with some birthday money, that kind of thing. But they have so been worth it. And I think interchangeable needles, when it comes to knitting, are a great example of really, multi-purpose tools, because you don't just have to knit in the round with interchangeable needles, you can also knit flat, you can do magic loop for smaller circumferences. And then when it comes to the sizes of the needles and the cables, you can more slowly, purchase the additional items one by one as and when they come up. But with the set that I got, sort of the medium needle sizes, I have found that actually I can get a lot of projects out of there, because they're the sort of average sizes from, I think it was 3mm up till about 5 or 5.5. So I can knit with 4-ply DK worsted and Aran weight yarn. So that's quite a large range, really. So that's been really fantastic, actually, because you don't need to have straight needles and fixed circulars and double points, and all of the rest of it. You can just use your interchangeable needle set. But aside from the obvious with knitting needles, you can think about things like scissors, embroidery scissors that you can use across crafts or perhaps in different uses in your household. And when it comes to stitch markers, as I chatted about recently in my video about the tools that you need for sock knitting, which you can watch up there, I chatted a lot about the different types of stitch markers that you can use and the way to use multi-purpose items like safety pins and loops of yarn. So yeah, just again, get creative and use what you have lying around. Tip number 8 is one of the most important things, which is learn to substitute yarns. You do not have to use the recommended yarn that is specified on a knitting pattern in a magazine or in a book. What you do need to do is go in to do your research and learn about the fibre properties of the yarn, its weight, and its construction, its ply. So again, that really requires you to do some learning, which is always going to be a good thing to give yourself more skills and knowledge. I have very rarely, if ever, used the yarn that is specified on the pattern, because quite frankly, I could never afford it. If you look at the history of knitting patterns have typically been sold in order to promote yarn or promote a yarn company, and a lot of the time knitting patterns have been given away for free, which you do still see, especially with larger companies and designers who aren't working on a sort of named individual basis, but are working for a commercial company. I just hesitate to use the word commercial because everybody's engaging in commerce, so question everything. When you're substituting yarns, as I said, you need to do a lot of research into exactly how to substitute the yarns. But overall, I would say avoid trendy outlets. If things look really beautiful online or in person, that means that a lot of care, attention, and money has gone into making it look and feel that way. And that cost is passed on to the consumer. Now, obviously, that is all well and good, and that is something for us all to enjoy when we can. But if you are not in a position where you can enjoy that, you need to be a lot more savvy. Look for opportunities to buy directly from the manufacturer. This can include mill shops and outlet shops, either directly from the mill on their own website or on sites such as eBay and possibly even Etsy. If you like light coloured yarns, you might even consider ordering from a wholesaler, because sometimes you can buy smaller batches, or if you know that you love DK weight yarn and you want to knit 3 cream coloured DK cardigans, or crochet an enormous blanket, you could get the undyed or the bleached yarn in one lot, which is going to work out cheaper than it would if you had bought it through another retail outlet. Or alternatively, if you have the hobby of dyeing or want to pick up another hobby, that's another way in which buying bleached or undyed yarns from a wholesaler could work out for you. And I do have a series all about using a yarn called Whole Super Soft, which is a Danish yarn which you can buy directly from the supplier, which comes coned and it's a lot cheaper. So do click up there to learn a little bit more about that. And of course, course, this whole matter of substituting yarns, learning about yarns, and, you know, kind of costing different types of yarns is a huge issue in itself, so I'm only touching upon it briefly in this video. But if you are interested in learning more about it, please do drop me a comment down below and let me know if you'd like me to make more videos about substituting yarns, and if there are any specific questions that you have or the things that you'd like to find out about. Tip number 9, staying on yarn, is to choose thinner and lightweight yarns. Thinner and lightweight yarns, so lace weight and 4-ply or fingering weights, are so much cheaper than thicker yarns. They're so much cheaper because yarn is sold by weight, not by length, and so, you know, for the 100 grams you get so much more bang for your buck, as they say. And also, quite obviously, if you choose a project with a thinner, lighter yarn, the project is going to take you longer. You're going to spend longer on the project, longer to enjoy. And, you know, if you've done your research, if you've, you know, looked into your technical skills and all of the rest of it, a lot of the time I would actually argue that the thinner and the lighter weight projects often end up having a lot more longevity, especially if they're knit at a very tight gauge, because the fabric isn't as physically heavy and isn't as likely to stretch out of shape. Now, obviously, there is a lot that goes into that, but, you know, just in a nutshell, if you choose a project with thinner yarn, it's going to take you longer to knit, you're going to be able to enjoy the project for longer, and you're not going to be always just finishing things just like that and always be looking out for the next project to buy and the next one, you know, the next one to invest in, quite frankly. Tip number 10. Start collecting patterns for scrap projects. Now, this is a really wonderful one which might actually take you by surprise. So start cultivating an eye for projects which use scraps. Now, this can be things that use scraps in a very, very obvious way, just like my eclectic crochet jumper, where the pattern called you to buy loads of different balls of yarn, but I used loads of yarns that I just had lying around at home. Another one which the scraps are used quite obviously is in this jumper, which again used a lot of leftovers and randoms and things that have been given to me for free. But it can also be used in a less obvious manner. When it comes to this hat, this was also a scraps leftover project. It's got quite a different effect because I combined yarns which had similar hues together for a kind of very, very subtle, mild effect. So that's not obviously a scrap project, and that fits really seamlessly into my wardrobe on those days where I do want to look eccentric. I mean, it is a fluorescent hat, but maybe not that eccentric. Another example of a scrap project that you might not realise is this one, in which I knitted a vintage pattern from another of Susan Crawford's vintage books, and I combined leftover balls of mohair in different shades, and I produced a striped effect in the yoke. But again, it's very, very subtle, and I only had to buy a little bit of yarn for the body, but it was actually a sock yarn, so it was really, really cheap. So that's just a handful of ideas, and of course there are many, many more, especially if you are comfortable knitting colour work and other kind of textured projects, or if you want to explore colour blocking. Honestly, I just feel like actually when it comes to combining scraps, the world's your oyster. So once you kind of tune your eye into it, just keep collecting together those pattern ideas, maybe make a Pinterest board, or, you know, have a scrapbook or something like that, so that when you do get to the point where you have a lot of leftovers, because that is, you know, something that just happens as we work on larger projects, you can then put those to work, and don't have the leftover balls be sitting dormant in your storage place, but actually see that as more wonderful yarn that you can keep on working with. Number 11 is to look for things secondhand. Now, this is quite an obvious one, and one that's more of a general guidance at the moment because, you know, obviously we are in 2020, and depending on where you live in the world, it might not be possible to go into things like thrift shops. But in general, look for things secondhand in places like charity shops, car boot sales, flea markets, antique stands. You might be really, really surprised about what you can find, especially if someone's doing a house clearance, if they're having a garage sale, something like that. When it comes to things like tools, you know, scissors can be sharpened. Look for those old-fashioned sewing baskets and sewing cabinets and furnitures, you know, like the expandable ones. Sometimes they're still full of haberdashery. You can get a lot of threads, needles and pins, things like that. Buttons, you can often find dead stock buttons on cards or even in tubes. Dead stock means it's unsold stock, so they're actually new. They're just old. Go online, look at Etsy, look at eBay. You might get lucky with a job lot of something, you never know. Number 12 is to spread the word. Tell people that you are knitting, that you are crocheting, wear your stuff, tell people that you've worn it. Because I'll be honest with you, I have had so much yarn, fabric, tools, patterns, you name it, I've had it given to me, offloaded for free, you know, by friends, relatives, people's mums, friends, cousin. I can't even begin to list the most tenuous connections where things have found their way to me for free, to a point where I've actually put a ban on it. I don't actually take anything anymore. And that is actually part of the reason why I've always had quite a large stash that I've been dealing with through my Stashless 2020 year, because people just give me things for free because maybe, you know, they had someone in their family that used to knit and stopped, or perhaps they passed away and they're doing a house clearance, you know, things like that. People are often really glad to pass things down to someone that does have the skills and knowledge to use them in a really wonderful way. So it's kind of a two-way favour. You're helping them out by taking it, and they're helping you out by giving you stuff for free. So obviously be nice about it, don't be demanding, but just drop the hint, you know, spread the word, put it out there that you are now knitting and crocheting and you love it, and just see what comes back to you. Like I said, you know, be nice, don't pursue it, don't be demanding. But again, you might get lucky, and one of these days someone might just turn up to your home with a huge garbage bag, refuse bag size of yarn, and you might just be able to create the most wonderful heirlooms of it for yourself. Okay, so those are my top 12 tips, but I do have one extra bonus tip, which is to be savvy to marketing. Now, you'll have noticed that I have mentioned the word sale a few times through the other tips when I've talked about things that I myself have purchased. But actually, I think that you should be very, very wary of sales, and just be very, very alert and aware when it comes to marketing in general. We're all trying to make a living, and it's not about, you know, penalising or saying that people shouldn't be doing this, that and the other. We're all trying to get by. And of course, businesses, large and small, are going to use the best tools and techniques they have available to create a large customer base. It's only natural, and quite frankly, you know, without the commercial side of things, as the world stands, we wouldn't really have a knitting industry. So, you know, so that's all very well and good, but when you're in a position where that is beyond you, you can't afford it, it can feel like there's quite a lot of pressure. I often have noticed that sometimes there feels like there's a lot of pressure to participate in knitting communities, both offline and online, by spending money, by going out there, buying the latest pattern, the most beautiful, luxurious yarn, knitting it, talking about it, you know, crocheting it, wearing it, and it has often felt like people are in a club together. And it can feel very exclusive and just not very nice in general, just like any kind of cliquey behaviour is pretty horrible. And that has not been the atmosphere that I have cultivated on my YouTube channel, The Crimson Stitchery, and across all of my social media outlets on Instagram, in my newsletter, in my Ravelry group. You know, I have always fostered a very welcoming environment because, quite frankly, there are so many reasons why you might be knitting on the budget, some of which might be vaguely inside your own control, but a lot of them are completely out of our control, especially now that we're in this uncertain time, trademark not, of COVID-19. But, you know, quite frankly, you know, you could say that I've chosen to be a postgraduate student and therefore be earning less than minimum wage across the last 5 years, but do you really choose to be poor? I don't think so. You know, a lot of the time it's out of your hands. Also, things can come out unexpectedly. They can take you by surprise. You can be put in circumstances that you never dreamed of. And through all of that, knitting and crochet, making things, is important for our mental health, and it's also really important for the way that we engage with, you know, other people, things, animals that are on the planet, other systems which produce textiles. It's about, you know, living as best as we can, and there are ways to do that while still on a budget, and to be proud of that, see it as a source of creativity and not see it as a source of shame and stigma. Frankly, the gap between the rich and the poor grows wider and more divisive every year, and we all just have to do our best to keep going and not cause harm to each other and the planet. So any kind of cliquey exclusive behavior, I really don't stand for it at all, and nor should you. Don't let yourself feel pressured. So getting back to sales. Now, if you are in, it really depends on the relationship that you have with money and kind of heavy discounting and that kind of pressure, time pressured marketing. If you're really strong and you're really good at that, then sure, wait, find out when the sale's going to be, whether that's through following a company on Instagram or a newsletter or, whatever it is, responding to an advert, and go into the sale with your list and stick to your list and buy what you need, for the next 6 months or for the year or whatever it is. Then you've got exactly what you need at a discount. And then do follow the other tips and suggestions that I've given you in this video. Work on one project at a time. Choose things with lighter weight, thinner yarn. Stick to your projects, get them finished, enjoy them. Don't get distracted and don't feel pressured that you're not making the next best thing, because there's always going to be a next best thing and there's always going to be a sale. So if you know that you do have a more tenuous relationship with sales, if you know that they can be a bit difficult for you, challenging maybe to stick to your budget or controlling your spending, or if you know that you're the type of person that when you see a bargain you can't resist, and I really am like that myself, then I would suggest that you simply step away from any kind of marketing outlet, any kind of social media marketing as well, until you are in a position to be stronger. So for example, you could put on an ad blocker onto your online browsers, unsubscribe from newsletters, if they are ones that, if they're purely linked to a shop. Don't unsubscribe from my newsletter because I write beautiful letters to everybody and send you pictures of flowers. Just joking. Log out of Instagram if you need to. Take time away so that you can reassess and, get back down to what it is that really makes you happy about the craft, which should be participating in the craft and sharing your joy and love with other people, and shouldn't be about feeling like you've got to keep up with people. So my advice, and it's something that I do myself quite regularly, is to go on a break, social media break, or whatever the other kind of media consumption that you engage with. And then when I'm ready, when I feel in a stronger place, then I can resubscribe to those newsletters. Or if I'm in a place where I know that I'm going to have some income coming in, then maybe I will go out and indulge in a sale, and whilst planning my projects properly, and so on and so forth. The community of knitting, crochet and crafting it's something that's become quite niche, but if you think back to what it was like 50 years ago, it was so commonplace. And quite frankly, I think that the inheritance of textile craft is so important, and making clothing is one of the things that makes us human, quite frankly, You don't see cats knitting, do you? Or doggies. Not really. They don't have the opposable thumbs. So we should participate in the knitting communities, online and offline, if those are available to you, by enjoying our craft, talking about it, wearing and showing off the things that we love, being generous, sharing our knowledge, and being open to welcome new knowledge as well, to learn and expand our skill set, encouraging others in turn to engage with the craft, to appreciate it, and to learn so much more about clothing and textiles. Participating in the community is not about buying the latest expensive yarn. That's it from me. I hope that this was helpful. I really have shared the best tips and advice I have, because I have always been knitting on a budget, as I have said. And rather than seeing it as something limiting, I've seen it as something which allows me to be exponentially more creative. So I really hope that, if nothing else, that you come away from watching this video with a renewed sense of purpose and an enjoyment of the craft that you have chosen to engage with. Do you have any other tips for knitting on a budget? Do you have any other little secret sources of outlets and ideas that you would like to share? Please do drop me a comment down below, let me know, and share it with other viewers of the Crimson Stitchery. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give me a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more videos about making